Welcome back to another episode of Earth is Our Home with Dr. Thomas Blaine. Today he's going to be looking at a global climate update, so stay tuned. Welcome back to another episode of Earth is Our Home with Dr. Thomas Blaine. Dr. Thomas Blaine is an associate professor with the Ohio State University Extension Program. Tom, this is your fourth season of doing these videos, and I think it's really great that you're able to come on and talk about some of the global climate things that occur not only in our area, but throughout the world.
Well, I love doing Earth is Our Home. And of course, we mainly have addressed global warming / climate change, but we also talk about other topics. We've talked about the upcoming eclipse that's coming to much of the United States, including a lot of counties in Ohio. Every single county in Ohio is going to get at least a partial eclipse in April. We've talked about war, and that was the Ukraine-Russian war. Now we have a war in the Middle East. These are because these are things that really put a challenge to humans on planet Earth and our very existence. These things like war, the eclipse is about Earth and its interaction with the sun and the moon, and that's kind of a fun thing. But right now, we're going to be talking about the Global Climate Change 2024 update here in January of 2024.
In global climate changes and with the updates, that it fluctuates so much. One year will be real cold, the next year we won't be so cold. And it just seems that it's very difficult to really understand, is there really a global climate change? And is it just sort of a seasonal kind of thing that occurs?
Patrick, it's a little bit of both. And another question that people ask me is, isn't it true that there's a natural component? Earth's temperature changes naturally. 2023 was the hottest year on record. Now you stop and think about that. The hottest year on record. We've got the satellite record that goes back to 1979. We have the surface-based temperatures, which go back to about the 1870s, 1880s. And we have ice core data that goes back 880,000 years. Probably the last time it was this warm on planet Earth was in the previous interglacial 115,000 years ago. So this is the warmest it's been. And I predicted this would happen. Patrick, you're going to put down below this the La Nina videos and others that explain back in 2022 when the temperatures were just really normal for this 30-year period that we've been in. And I was warning people those were artificially low and explaining it was because of El Nino / La Nina that we had those low temperatures. But look now at what's happened. If you look out there way out to the right, you can see, first of all, that 2023, we've got all the data through December. It was 0.83 degrees Celsius above the baseline. And notice in January of 2023, that little blue circle right below the baseline. We were actually below the baseline. So looking there at January of 2023, that was a year ago, the global temperature was below the baseline. It's kind of hard to argue that we're facing global warming when a temperature is below the baseline. But I explained to everyone that all those low temperatures that we had seen from 2021, 22, on into early 23 were caused by the Southern Oscillation, and specifically by La Nina. And I warned folks, look, this La Nina has been going on for so long, and you can see how long temperatures had been suppressed since about 2020, when that red line goes down. During that time, that in fact, the global temperature was being held below the trend, not because global warming had stopped, not because it's not real, but because La Nina was so strong. And I told people what that means is all it's doing is covering up the warming inside the oceans. And when the top comes off of that and we get back to El Nino, there's so much energy pent up in there that we're going to take off like a rocket. So look at the temperatures throughout the year 2023. We soared about 9/10 of a degree Celsius, which is about 1.8 degrees Fahrenheit. That's enormous amount of warming for 1 year. But I called it, and you can watch those videos and see where I called it. It's not magic, it's just scientific method. We use scientific method on here. And that's the way to go about studying this. Now, so people like to say, well, changes in Earth's temperatures are caused by nature and are beyond human control. They say, how many times you heard somebody say, temperature changes on Earth are natural? They have natural causes. Well, some factors that lead to climate change are in fact natural, but some are not. Some are caused by humans. And we can do a lot better than throwing up our hands and saying we can't tell the two apart. I heard one physicist get on there and say, we don't have a special thermometer that tells us what percentage of the warming is natural and what percentage is caused by humans. That was an ignorant statement. Yeah, an ignorant statement given by an atmospheric physics, because science doesn't need to have that. We use scientific method to determine what factors influence something, anything. The death rate on a disease, changes in inflation, any kind of phenomenon generally has more than one cause. And we can go about with statistical procedures that identify what the causes are and the contribution of each. And we can do that here, and we're going to do that right now. First of all, let's look. The first thing that might come to your mind on what a natural phenomenon is that might be driving the current warming is solar activity, output of the sun, but it's not doing it. Look at the red line, global temperature. This goes back, the satellite data went to 1979. This goes back to about 1879, an extra 100 years. And look how it's gone. Okay, look where we are now. The red way out on the right, way up there. Okay. Now, look at solar output. There's no correlation. In fact, for the past 70 or 80 years, if you look down there at the years, 1950s or 60s. The solar irradiance, that's solar forcing, has gone down. You can see the tips, those peaks have gone down, and the bottoms have gone down. Solar output cannot possibly be driving this current warming. So we've ruled that out. No special thermometer. We don't need that. We don't do magic. We do science. All right. So one thing we got to look at then is the Southern Oscillation. And that's why I've spent so much time on it. El Nino and La Nina. And it's very easy to show the relationship between the global temperatures and the Southern Oscillation. It's a sine wave pattern we see in the data. So when you look at that, you've got a trend going up, and Patrick's going to draw on there from about 1979. It was on the axis there at about negative 0.3. And now we are at about positive 0.4 on the right side. It's gone from negative 0.3 to positive 0.4. It's 7 degrees. 0.7, I should say, 7/10 of a degree Celsius, which is about, 1.2 degrees Fahrenheit in that amount of time. But you also saw the ups and downs. There were ups and downs, waves around that. And those are caused by the Southern Oscillation, El Nino and La Nina. So look at that huge patch of blue around 2020, 21, 22, gigantic blue patch. That's what I'm telling you was keeping those global temperatures down back during those years. And even in January of 2023, we were below the baseline. Why? La Nina. This is La Nina. Humans have no effect on La Nina. You want to know what it is? Go watch the videos. We shifted over from La Nina to El Nino back around May and June of this year. And you can see the red, just a little patch of red starting out there. And already just that much El Nino has driven us up to a record. We're nowhere near the previous El Ninos, but we're already at a record high. Why? Well, it's because of human activity. So this phenomenon, the sine wave, is caused by El Nino, La Nina. But look at this part. This is what's driving the long run change in global temperature. They started with this data set back around 1957 when there was about 315 parts per million carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. We are now in early 2024. Last month, this has data is October 5th of 2023. And it's from UC San Diego, from Mauna Loa Observatory in Hawaii. We're up to 420. Notice how that has gone up. So again, we go back at those temperatures and you see that trend going up from negative 0.3 to about positive 0.4. That's being driven by the CO2 humans are putting in. We saw it on the graph. The ups and downs that go around that, the sine wave patterns, are caused by El Nino, La Nina. So it's true, and you can see it here. Tell them you saw it on Earth is our home. Some things are caused by nature and global temperature, but some are caused by humans. And what humans are causing is not a cycle. El Nino causes those ups and downs. He's always pointed those out. Well, but that's natural. But what is not natural is the upward trend that's been going on for so long. And there you can see the one that goes before the satellite data starts out in around 1880 when we started getting temperatures measured from thermometers. You know, you compare these slides, please keep this handy, come back to this slide, go to any red patch. Look at the red patch in 2016, 2015, it's 2016, and you'll see temperatures were up. Go to 98, 90, 97, 98. See that red patch? You'll see temperatures were up. Go to 2000. Temperatures had gone back down. Go to 2008. You can do this on your own. Temperatures had gone back down. It's like clockwork. This is like clockwork. Nature plays a role. But nature on El Nino is not going to cause a catastrophe. This, if we continue with business as usual, there's a non-trivial risk that by late in the century, it will cause a catastrophe with temperatures 3 degrees Celsius above the pre-industrial average. That's about 5 degrees Fahrenheit above. That would be very highly likely.
What would be the catastrophes that would occur if this continued to go up?
Okay, so as you can see, that's why I've said, first of all, I just want to say, I've said all the agreements haven't done anything, all the windmills, all that stuff. You're kidding yourself. And I try to tell people that, you know, hey, y'all are kidding yourself. And there's the data to prove it. We haven't made a dent. This is business as usual. So a recent book that came out is called The Heat Will Kill You First. The heat will kill you first. His argument is that there will be a higher number of days in various areas where the temperature is virtually unbearable. Even in Ohio, you know, when we get those real heat waves, people are working on construction on highways and so forth. Agricultural workers work outside. In developing countries, you know, they're outside almost all the time. He argues that especially in the tropics or places where it already gets very hot, that there will be an increase in the number of days that are above human body temperature. Human body temperature is 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit. Once the temperature gets above that, the body can't cool itself. Even with perspiration, which is nature's way of us cooling ourselves, you know, you perspire, the wind blows, it's nice and cool. Doesn't work like that when we get up over body temperature. And he argues that we're going to see a lot of deaths from people trying to work outside. That's just a book called The Heat Will Kill You First. I would recommend you read that. My personal view is the deadly aspect of this is a collapse of agriculture. If you take Oklahoma and make its temperature like way down in Mexico somewhere, the crops there in Oklahoma that they grow, the corn, soybeans, they won't be able to survive. And we can't just move everything north, because when you start to do that, the soils up there may not be suited. In other words, in places where soils are suited for wheat, soybeans, things that really drive the food system, If those places can no longer produce, we're talking about a collapse in agriculture and also livestock. Uh, Cattle have a difficulty handling heat. Many times cattle are kept inside, but they're outside a lot. They graze in pastures. We're talking about a collapse of agriculture. 9 billion mouths by a little after 2050 to feed. That's a lot of mouths to feed. And if agriculture collapses, that would be the first step. And then this fellow's writing, the heat itself will kill people. So there's all kinds of things that could come along here to cause climate catastrophe.
When we had the Dust Bowl back in the 1930s,
Yes,
that decimated a lot of the agriculture.
it did.
During our current wars from 1940 all the way up to present time, we have had death and starvation. And I know that carbon dioxide concentrations are rising, but I also feel that we have looked squarely at the problems and we've done something. Like, for instance, with the Dust Bowl, out of that tragedy came new ways to farm.
Yes.
Out of some of the wars, there has been new ways for diplomats to seek peace, etc. And I would think that because of the global climate problems, identifying that there is a problem is first. And the second is we need to do something about it.
Yeah, there's no question about it that there's a lot of people still in denial, which is why I'm doing this, to show you that you cannot sit back and say it's natural. I just showed everybody the data. I showed you the natural changes. We look at the sun, we look at El Nino, but we look here, right here. CO2 is going up, and despite all the agreements and the windmills and everything else, there's nothing that's stopping this trend in CO2 concentration increasing. We are going to have some kind of innovation that allows us to produce energy without driving carbon dioxide concentrations up over 500 parts per million. Because if we don't, we're going to have those ill effects that we talked about. Now, I just want to say this. A lot of people get angry with me for saying this, but I want to say it anyway, Patrick. If you look at what's happened so far on CO2, if you look what happened, say, from 1960 to 2020, much of that increase in CO2 has been benign. It's been benign. It's made the earth more productive for agriculture. The warming hasn't really hurt agriculture. In fact, high CO2 is fertilizer for plants. They take it in and, they fill those greenhouses with CO2 because that's plant food for photosynthesis. But the problem is too much of a good thing becomes a bad thing. And when that occurs, I'm thinking is not so far away, probably before we get to 500 parts per million in the atmosphere. But so far, and a lot of people get mad at me and say I shouldn't say this, but the proof is in the pudding. Agricultural yields have gone up. We have 8 billion people moving toward 9, and there's less starvation than there's been earlier in the century. So something's worked out right. And I guess it turns out that the changes so far have been benign, but that doesn't mean changes in the future are going to be benign. So Earth's temperature's warmed about 1.4 degrees Celsius. That's 2.5 degrees Fahrenheit since the pre-industrial era, 1.4. Most of that warming has come in the last 40 years, the satellite era. A lot of people are saying a lot of these negative impacts, Patrick, will start to kick in at 1.5 degrees Celsius. Nobody knows if that's true, but I can tell you one thing. We're not going to be able to avoid. They've been saying we got to avoid 1.5. We're at 1.4 now. And 1.5 is baked in the cake. We're definitely going to warm another 1/10 of a degree.
So, Tom, I know you have a lot more information. So that's going to be part 2 coming up, where you will continue to discuss the global climate. But sort of capsulize where the global climate is. And
Okay.
What's your thoughts?
We've shown here when people say global warming is natural, that's partly true. There are natural things that cause temperature to change. But over the past few hundred years since the Industrial Revolution, there are human items, specifically CO2, which causes temperatures to change. So it's a human component and a natural component. The natural component just going up and down. It doesn't have a long-term trend right now. But the human component has a long-term trend. And if we continue on that trend, we face a non-trivial risk of climate catastrophe by the end of the century. And we'll talk about that more next time.
Hey, we're talking with Dr. Thomas Blaine. He's an associate professor with the Ohio State University Extension Office. Tom, thank you.
Thanks a lot, Patrick. My pleasure.